Today on Something's Happening Here, we continue our discussion on artificial intelligence, but we're going to take a break from the news today and look from the scriptures to see why I've made some of the claims that I have made in terms of why I don't believe God will allow these technological advances to occur. It's going to be an exciting Bible study, and hopefully we're going to come away knowing something that gives us even more hope than the idea that we can upload our consciousness into the internet. I'm Steve Hicks. Thanks for tuning in to Something's Happening Here. Welcome back, friends. Thanks for spending your midweek with us. If you're watching this live, then today is Wednesday. And as I said in the opener, we're going to have a little bit of a Bible study today rather than a news study today, because we're going to talk about the state of the living. What I mean by that is Elon Musk, with his Neuralink and other proponents of the singularity to digitize human consciousness and other versions of that same thing, they are trying to redefine what it means to be alive. And I don't think that the Lord will allow us to achieve that kind of power if it's even possible. I mean, if the devil cannot create, and the devil's a whole lot more powerful and smart than we are, then I just kind of think that we also are not going to have that ability to create life. You know, God already gave us the ability to procreate life, to have children in our own images, just as God made us in his image. But I just have a hard time believing that he's going to allow a kind of sense of macro creation in the way that we're talking about here. So in any case, the state of the living is going to be a fun Bible study. Before we get to that, though, there's a couple housekeeping issues that I have to mention. At the end of yesterday's segment, I pointed you to tdi.org, but on the screen was the graphic for the entire URL, talkingdonkeyinternational.org. And this is worth noting. I've done this a couple times, but I had to talk with the producer, and it's worth noting because tdi.org is not our website, and if you go there, it'll point you to something else completely different. So you have to actually do the whole thing, the whole 9-syllable name, talkingdonkeyinternational.org, and that will get you where you need to be. Second point of housekeeping is the reality that we are all running up expenses with not always a way to meet those expenses. So if you like what you are seeing day after day and you think we are making a positive impact on the spiritual world, would you take a few minutes to send us a donation? You should have a link to do that somewhere on the platform where you're watching this. Especially on Facebook. I know we've got it twice on every post, on the description and in a comment. So it would really help us out a lot, and it would help us to stay on the air. Okay, so back to the issue at hand, the singularity and the state of the living. Yesterday, we talked about this projection from our scientists telling us that by the year 2045, they hope to have achieved the singularity, or the way to upload human consciousness into a digital form to be stored on a neural network or the internet broadly or some sort of hard drive or something like that. And we have seen this in, there was an episode of The X-Files that was built on this premise as well. It's not a new idea. It's been around in various art forms for a while. But now we're kind of getting to the place in history where we think it might be real. Well, I made the claim yesterday that I don't think God will ever allow us to achieve that level of technology. And some of the reasons why, which we'll talk more about today. But just think about the consequence of that statement. If it is true that God will not permit us to achieve this singularity, and if it is also true that that singularity is coming by the year 2045, then the only conclusion you can draw from those two statements together is that Christ will come before the year 2045. yet another reason why I believe Christ is coming soon. Certainly not the only reason, but when it's a powerful reason. And when you stack it up against all of the biblical evidence and historical and prophetic evidence, it fits really nicely. And it lets us know that Christ is coming soon. And therefore, it's kind of an urgent thing to get to know him and to be ready for his appearing, because we don't get a second chance, despite what some of our churches tell you. Okay, so let's dig into this. We looked at Genesis 2, verse 7 yesterday, and I'm going to look at it again today. Genesis 2:7 is the place where we see the formation of the very first man, and it is described as the Lord forming him from the dust of the ground and breathing into his nostrils the breath of life. And those two things, the body and the breath from God, coming together, make him a living being. Or in the original King James, it actually uses the word soul. He becomes a living soul. And that's worthwhile because the King James was not the first English translation ever, but it definitely was the first really ubiquitous one. And it became like the standard for all English scriptural translations. So what that means is all of the use of the word soul in the English vernacular since 1611, when this translation was published, ultimately is pointing to this verse, Genesis 2:7, where we see a definition of what constitutes a soul written in English words. So, I know that our churches have gone away from this kind of embodied soul idea that we see, where you are a soul. It's not that you have one, but you are one. But the Bible hasn't changed. So it's worthwhile to recognize from where that original concept of a soul comes. So I made the claim yesterday that when we separate the concept of life from the body, then the concept of life falls apart. You can't have life without a body. Once the body dies, the breath of God returns to God who gave it. It's actually, we can see that in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7, if you want to look that up. The breath of God goes back to God who gave it. And so there's nothing left. Even if somehow we're able to mimic your brain function digitally so that we can create a program that thinks like you do, you're still going to die. Maybe, just maybe, we can create a digital version of you, but you are still in the grave. And so, on the one hand, A, I don't think that we'll ever be permitted to achieve that level of technology, but B, even if we are, let's all recognize that you're not living on beyond the death of your body, even if there is some digital image of you out there. Now, why? Why can I say that with such confidence, that it will not be you, even if that technology exists? Well, that's because of Genesis 1. Genesis 1:27 tells us plainly that God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And so, at its very kind of most basic and fundamental, you and I were made in the image of God. And let me tell you something. God pre-exists Earth itself, life on Earth, human technology, human ideas. And so, therefore, the image of God cannot be a digital computer program. It just can't. Because the image of God has been around since thousands and thousands and thousands of years before there was ever even a computer in the first place, right? So if we are trying to recreate our image digitally, we are by definition moving away from the image of God. So I don't think God is going to let that happen. Even more basic than that, I don't think it's possible. That's why I'm saying, even if they can create a digital copy of your brain somehow, it's still not you, because you are made in the image of God. And that digital version of you is not, right? So I hope that even if we're kind of clinging to the singularity or ideas like that in the future, let's recognize how much more beautiful, also how much more like prestigious and royal it is that we can say, I am made in the image of the creator of all things. I am not made in the image of Google or AT&T or Elon Musk, right? Nothing like this. I'm not made in the image of any kind of digital technology at all. I am made in the image of the living God. Hallelujah. And why would I even want that to not be true? To underscore this, I will take you to the book of Job, which is like slightly to the left of the middle of the Bible. It's right before the book of Psalms. And Job, in chapter 33, verse 4, says this particular thing. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. That's exactly what Genesis 2, verse 7 told us, right? The body itself is not alive until the breath of God comes to animate it. So that's not new, but I went here because that's specifically telling us that life comes when the breath of God comes. And absent of that breath of God, there is no life. And so God is not going to breathe his breath of life into a computer. He can't, right? The computer is not alive. And so that's just further evidence to show from the Bible that this concept of the singularity just cannot take place. Or if it does, it will not be the next level of humanity. It'll simply be a digital copy, not in God's image. All right, in the few minutes we've got left, join me back in Genesis chapter 3. And this is kind of a preview of what we're going to talk about on Friday a little bit. But we're going to see that the devil has been trying to separate the concept of life from that Genesis 2:7 simple paradigm since the very beginning, right? So God told Adam and Eve, well, told Adam, and then implicitly Adam told Eve, but there was a restriction. You can eat anything you want to from any tree in the garden except this one. Don't eat from this one. And then the devil comes along in chapter 3, convinces Eve to eat from that one forbidden tree, and he does it in this following way in verses 4 and 5. The serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So he convinced her to rebel against God, and then ultimately, through getting Adam to do the same, plunging the entire world into sin and death, with this idea that her essence of life was not tied to her body. That somehow, even after this event called death, she would continue on, actually in a greater form, where she's going to be more like God as a result. And I'm not going to go too far into this, but ask yourself how similar that sounds to whatever you hear from your church's pulpit every time you go to church about what happens after you die. Is the preacher saying the same thing the devil said? Or is he telling the truth from the Bible? Anyway. And lastly, in case we were confused as to how much of what the devil says is true, John chapter 8, verse 44 records the words of Jesus saying, the devil, when he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, or the NIV says he speaks his native language. For he is a liar and the father of it. So was the devil telling Eve the truth in the garden? Or was he lying because he's the father of lies? Right. So come on back tomorrow. We're going to continue our discussion of AI, taken in a slightly different direction tomorrow. So make sure you're subscribed on Facebook, that you can like the page and change your notifications to be alerted when we publish videos. On YouTube, that means your subscribe button and your notification bell both. And on talkingdonkeyinternational.org, go to the podcast page and bookmark it until we have a better subscription feature there. God bless you all. I will see you tomorrow on Something's Happening Here.